At 6:41 p.m., the emergency doors of Cedar Point Naval Medical Center opened, and two military handlers came running through them with fear written across their faces. Behind them were two large K9 stretchers. On one lay Rook, a dark sable Dutch shepherd. On the other was Lyra, a black and tan Dutch shepherd female. Both dogs belonged to a specialized Navy K9 unit. Both were considered exceptionally valuable, and both were in serious trouble. Rook's eyes were half closed. Lyra barely moved. The handlers didn't know exactly what had happened. They only knew that 20 minutes earlier, both dogs had been standing normally during a training exercise. Then, almost simultaneously, something had changed, and now neither dog was responding the way trained military working dogs normally did. "Move!" a handler shouted. The veterinary emergency team rushed toward them. 7 doctors and veterinary specialists would eventually become involved. And, before the night was over, every one of them would believe they were running out of options. But none of them knew that a quiet nurse standing at the end of the corridor had spent years learning exactly what these dogs were trying to tell them. Her name was Leah Mercer, and for almost 4 years, nobody at Cedar Point had known what she had done before becoming a nurse. If you're watching from somewhere in the world right now, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to see how far these stories travel. And stay with this story, because what happened to these two rare military K9s would reveal something about the quietest nurse in the hospital that almost nobody knew. What's their condition? Dr. Amelia Grant, the senior veterinary physician, moved between the two stretchers. Rook's respiratory rate is unstable. Lyra, similar. Temperature, elevated. Pulse, weak. Grant's expression tightened. Any obvious trauma? No. Exposure? The handler shook his head. Unknown. Grant looked at the two dogs. Separate them. The team immediately moved Rook into one treatment bay and Lyra into another. The handlers followed. They were both Navy SEAL K9 handlers. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hale had worked with Rook for nearly 4 years. Petty Officer Jonah Pierce had been Lyra's handler for almost 3. These weren't animals they simply reported to work with. They were partners. Marcus had slept beside Rook during deployments. Jonah had spent thousands of hours training Lyra. They knew every change in their dog's behavior, and that was why Marcus was terrified, because he had never seen Rook like this. "Come on, buddy." Marcus placed his hand near Rook's head. The dog barely reacted. "Look at me." Nothing. Marcus looked toward Dr. Grant. "What happened?" "We don't know yet." "You've seen this before?" "Not exactly." "Then find out." Grant didn't take offense. She understood. Marcus wasn't being rude, he was scared. Across the room, Jonah was having the same conversation. "She was fine 20 minutes ago." Dr. Samuel Ortega checked Lyra's monitor. "Did she ingest anything?" "No." "Drink anything unusual?" "No." "Was she exposed to heat?" "Not enough to explain this." Ortega frowned. "Then we need more information." At the far end of the corridor, Leah Mercer watched. She was 36 years old, dark brown hair pulled into a simple low ponytail. Hazel eyes. Navy blue scrubs, white hospital ID badge, black stethoscope. Nothing about her suggested that she had ever worked around military dogs. To most of the hospital, Leah was simply reliable. She covered shifts, helped other nurses, stayed late, never complained, and almost never spoke about herself. She had become the kind of person people noticed only when something needed to be done. But now she was staring through the treatment room glass. Not at the monitors, at Rook, then Lyra. Then back to Rook. Something wasn't right. Leah watched his breathing. 3 shallow breaths. Pause. Another breath. She looked at Lyra, almost the same pattern. Her eyes narrowed. That's strange. A nurse standing beside her glanced over. What? Leah shook her head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. She had seen that pattern before, years ago, in a place she hadn't thought about in a very long time. Inside the treatment room, the doctors continued working. Fluids, oxygen support, blood testing, temperature control, neurological checks. Everything was being done methodically, but the dogs weren't improving. At 7:05 p.m., Dr. Grant looked at the results. Nothing obvious. Dr. Ortega frowned. Could be systemic exposure. Maybe. Neurological? Possible. Cardiopulmonary? Possible. Nobody liked the word possible. It meant they had theories, but no answer. And the clock kept moving. At 7:18 p.m., Rook's condition worsened. His breathing became shallow again. Marcus stepped closer. Doctor. Grant looked at the monitor. I see it. What's happening? We're trying to stabilize him. Marcus stared at her. Try harder. Grant looked at him. We are. Marcus turned away. He rubbed both hands over his face. Then he whispered something. Leah couldn't hear the words. But she recognized the expression. It was the same expression she had once seen on another handler. Years earlier, a handler sitting outside a K9 treatment room waiting, hoping, blaming himself. Leah looked down. A memory came back. A cold training facility. A frightened Belgian Malinois. A young Leah kneeling on a concrete floor, and a senior military K9 specialist saying, "Don't treat the behavior. Find the fear underneath it." Leah closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them. She looked at Rook again. The breathing pattern, the restlessness, the timing, something was connecting. At 7:26 p.m., Lyra suddenly lifted her head. Jonah immediately leaned forward. That's it. But Lyra lowered her head again. Jonah looked at Dr. Ortega. She recognized my voice. That's encouraging. Then why is she getting worse? Ortega didn't answer. Leah stepped closer to the observation window. She noticed something nobody else seemed to notice. Both dogs became more unsettled whenever a portable air unit near the treatment room activated. The machine wasn't loud. A human barely noticed it. But the dogs reacted. Rook's ears moved. Lyra swallowed repeatedly. Then their breathing changed. Leah watched it happen again. The air unit switched on. Rook's respiration became irregular. Lyra's body stiffened. Leah turned toward the equipment. Doctor, Grant looked over. Yes? Can you shut that unit off for 30 seconds? Grant frowned. Why? Please. Grant signaled a technician. The machine was switched off. Silence. Leah watched Rook. 1 breath, 2, 3. His breathing began to settle. Lyra's did too. Dr. Grant noticed. Turn it back on. The technician restarted it. Immediately, both dogs became more unsettled. Grant stared. Again. The unit went off. The dogs settled slightly. Grant looked at Leah. What are you seeing? Leah swallowed. I think they're reacting to something in the airflow. The room became quiet. One doctor looked at another. Dr. Grant stepped toward the equipment. Check the filter. The technician removed it. Nothing obvious. Check the intake. Nothing. Run an air quality test. The technician nodded. Leah continued watching the dogs. Then she asked Marcus, where were they before they came here? Training facility. How long were they there? About 2 hours. Did they enter any enclosed vehicle? Marcus hesitated. Yes, both? Yes. How long? Maybe 20 minutes. Leah looked at Jonah. And Lyra? Same. Was anything cleaned in that vehicle? Jonah thought. Yes, what? New disinfectant. Leah's expression changed. Did they smell different afterward? Marcus looked at her. Rook was licking his lips. Jonah suddenly spoke. Lyra kept swallowing. Leah nodded slowly. What kind of disinfectant? Marcus didn't know. He called the training facility. The answer came back several minutes later. A new cleaning product had been used inside the transport enclosure. It had been approved for general facility use. But it had been applied shortly before the dogs entered. And the ventilation system had been running. Dr. Grant immediately requested the product information. When it arrived, she read the technical sheet. Her expression changed. Respiratory irritant under concentrated conditions. Leah nodded. That's what I was afraid of. Grant looked at her. But this doesn't explain the severity. Not by itself. What else? Leah pointed toward the portable air unit. If contaminated particles or residue were being circulated repeatedly, Grant finished the thought. Their exposure could have continued after they arrived. Leah nodded. Exactly. The team immediately removed the equipment and isolated the ventilation source. For the first time that evening, they had a plausible explanation. But there was another problem. The exposure had already happened, and the dogs' bodies were still behaving as though the threat remained. At 7:47 p.m., Rook's monitor changed. His breathing became slightly more regular. Marcus noticed. Is that better? Dr. Grant nodded. Yes. What changed? She looked toward Leah, the environment. But Leah wasn't celebrating. She was watching Rook's eyes. The dog still looked frightened. His body remained tense. His nervous system hadn't caught up with the change. Leah knew what that meant. The danger might be gone. But the dog didn't know that yet. She had seen this before. And that was when she finally decided to reveal the part of her past she had spent years keeping quiet. She walked into the treatment room. Dr. Grant looked at her. What are you thinking? Leah looked at Rook, then Lyra. I think you've removed what was hurting them. Grant nodded. Then? Leah took a breath. I think we still need to teach their bodies that they're safe. The doctor stared at her. What do you mean? Leah looked at the 7 doctors surrounding the room, then at the 2 SEAL handlers, and finally at the 2 rare military K9s. I used to work with military working dogs. Silence. Marcus stared. Jonah looked confused. Dr. Grant slowly lowered her clipboard. Used to? Leah nodded. Before I became a nurse. Doing what? Leah looked at Rook. Recovery work. Where? She hesitated, then answered quietly. With deployed K9 teams. Marcus took a step closer. Why didn't anyone know? Leah looked at him. Because nobody asked. The room went silent. Then Rook suddenly lifted his head. Leah looked at him. Her expression softened. He's ready. Dr. Grant frowned. Ready for what? Leah slowly rolled up her sleeves. For the part that I learned years ago. She looked at the clock. At 7:51 p.m., then at the 2 dogs. If I'm right? She paused. We have about 1 hour to bring their bodies back down from the stress response. Marcus stared at her. Can you do it? Leah looked at Rook, then Lyra. I don't know. She took one slow breath. But I know where to start. And for the first time that night, the 7 doctors stepped aside, not because they had given up, but because they finally realized the quiet nurse standing in front of them knew something they didn't. And the next 60 minutes would decide whether Rook and Lyra went home with their handlers or never walked out of Cedar Point Naval Medical Center at all. At 7:52 p.m., Leah Mercer stepped fully into the treatment room. 7 doctors were still there. 3 veterinary technicians stood around the equipment. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hale remained beside Rook. Petty Officer Jonah Pierce stood near Lyra. Nobody spoke. Leah looked at both dogs, then she looked at the clock. First, we make the room predictable. Dr. Amelia Grant nodded. What does that mean? No unnecessary movement, no loud voices, no sudden commands. One of the technicians glanced around. We already removed the air unit. Good. Leah pointed toward the overhead lights. Dim those. The lights were lowered. Then she looked at the handlers. Don't stand over them. Marcus immediately moved. Jonah followed. Leah crouched several feet from Rook. She didn't touch him. She didn't call his name. She didn't ask him to sit. She simply sat quietly. Marcus looked confused. What are you waiting for? Leah kept her eyes on Rook. His breathing. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Rook's chest rose and fell. Slowly, unevenly, then Leah began breathing at the same steady rhythm. In. Pause. Out. Pause. Again. Rook's ears moved. Leah didn't look directly at him. She continued. In. Pause. Out. Pause. Dr. Grant watched the monitor. His respiratory rate is changing. Leah nodded. Don't interrupt him. Nobody moved. Rook's breathing became slightly more regular. Then Leah did the same thing near Lyra. The female Dutch shepherd's ears twitched. Her eyes opened. Jonah whispered, Lyra. Leah raised one finger. Not yet. Jonah stopped. Let her decide when she's ready. The doctors exchanged glances. Nobody in the room had expected something so simple to make a measurable difference. But Leah wasn't relying on the breathing pattern alone. She was using a military recovery technique she had learned years earlier. It had been designed around a basic principle. A working dog, recovering from extreme stress, needs predictability before obedience. Instead of demanding commands, handlers created a familiar rhythm, a familiar voice, a familiar posture. A familiar presence. The dog was given time to recognize that the environment had changed. Leah had learned it from a senior K9 specialist named Chief Warren Maddox. He had once told her, if you keep asking a frightened dog to obey, you're measuring the fear instead of reducing it. She had never forgotten those words. At 7:59 p.m., Rook opened his eyes fully. Marcus immediately stepped forward. Leah looked at him, slowly. Marcus nodded. He moved beside the dog and sat on the floor. Rook looked at him. Marcus smiled. Hey, partner. Rook's ears moved. Marcus's voice softened. It's me. Rook blinked. You know me. The dog's breathing remained steady. Leah nodded. Keep talking. Marcus swallowed. What do I say? Anything he recognizes. Marcus thought, then smiled through wet eyes. Remember that training field? Rook's ear moved. You hated the blue tunnel. The dog's eyes remained on him. You always pretended you didn't. Marcus laughed quietly. You'd stand there and stare at it like I was asking you to walk into a building. Rook's nose moved slightly. Marcus's voice broke. You always made me come get you. Leah watched. Rook's breathing became even more regular. Dr. Grant looked at the monitor. That's remarkable. Leah shook her head. No. She looked at Marcus. That's familiarity. Across the room, Jonah sat beside Lyra. He began talking too. Remember the beach? Lyra opened her eyes. We're not there. Her ears moved. You're here. He placed his hand on the floor beside her. Same voice. Lyra slowly turned her head. Jonah smiled. That's it. The dog's tail moved once. Only once. But everyone saw it. Jonah looked toward Leah. His eyes filled with tears. She heard me. Leah smiled. She never stopped. At 8:08 p.m., Dr. Grant checked both dogs. Temperature is coming down. A technician looked at the monitors. Respiration is improving. Another doctor checked Rook's neurological response. He's more responsive. The room became cautiously hopeful, but Leah remained serious. We're not finished, Dr. Grant nodded. What comes next? Handler contact. Marcus frowned. We're already here. Not enough. Leah looked at him. He needs to choose the contact. Marcus understood. He waited. Rook slowly lifted his head. He looked at Marcus, then at Leah. Marcus held out his hand but didn't touch him. Rook moved his nose forward, then gently touched Marcus's palm. Marcus closed his eyes. Good boy. Leah smiled. Now. Marcus placed his hand gently against Rook's shoulder. Rook didn't tense. Instead, he leaned slightly into him. Marcus's face collapsed with relief. He whispered, I've got you. Jonah did the same with Lyra. She slowly moved her head toward his hand. He touched her shoulder. Her eyes closed. Jonah whispered, I've got you too. For several seconds, nobody spoke. 7 doctors had been working around those dogs for hours. But now the room felt different. The dogs weren't simply being treated. They were reconnecting. At 8:16 p.m., Dr. Grant stepped into the hallway with Leah. You knew exactly what to do. Leah shook her head. I knew what to try. You didn't hesitate. I've seen this before. With how many dogs? Leah hesitated. Enough. Grant studied her. You must have been very good. Leah looked away. I made mistakes. What kind? Leah's expression changed. The kind you remember. Grant didn't push, but Leah continued. There was a dog named Mako. She paused. He was a young working dog, extremely intelligent, extremely sensitive. What happened? He came back from deployment different. Different how? He reacted to certain sounds. Leah looked down the hallway. He wasn't aggressive. He was frightened. Grant nodded. What did you do? I thought I could fix it quickly. And pushed too hard. Leah's voice became quieter. I kept giving commands because I thought obedience would make him feel safe. Grant understood. It didn't. No. Leah swallowed. I lost his trust. For the first time, Grant saw the weight Leah had been carrying. What happened to Mako? He was eventually transferred to another program. Did he recover? Leah smiled faintly. Yes. Then why does it still bother you? Because someone else had to teach me what I should have understood from the beginning. Grant looked at her. Chief Maddox? Leah nodded. He taught me to stop asking what the dog was doing wrong. She looked through the glass at Rook and started asking what the dog was afraid of. That was why Leah had left military K9 work. Not because she hated it, because she respected it too much. She didn't trust herself after Mako, so she went into nursing. She learned how to care for frightened people. Patients who couldn't explain what hurt. Patients who couldn't speak. Patients who reacted emotionally because they were overwhelmed. Over the years, she realized something. The lesson Mako had taught her wasn't only about dogs, it was about anyone in distress. Sometimes people didn't need another command. They needed someone to make the environment feel safe enough to respond. At 8:31 p.m., Leah returned to the treatment room. Rook was awake. Lyra was awake. Both were resting beside their handlers. Dr. Grant checked the monitors. They're stabilizing. Leah smiled. Good. Marcus looked at her. You said 1 hour. She looked at the clock. Not yet. He laughed quietly. Still counting? Always. At 8:37 p.m., Rook tried to stand. Marcus immediately moved. Easy. The dog's legs trembled. Leah stepped forward. Don't help him unless he asks. Marcus stopped. Rook stood for 3 seconds, then 5. Then slowly lowered himself again. Everyone watched. Dr. Grant smiled. That's progress. Leah nodded. Yes. At 8:42 p.m., Lyra stood. Jonah's eyes widened. Come on, girl. She remained standing. Her legs were shaky, but she was upright. Jonah covered his mouth. A technician quietly smiled. Dr. Grant looked toward Leah. Both are responding much faster than I expected. Leah looked at the dogs. They're strong. Dr. Grant shook her head. So are you. Leah smiled. I just listened. At 8:51 p.m., both dogs were stable enough for the team to begin reducing some supportive measures. The 7 doctors gathered around the observation window. Dr. Grant looked at Leah. "How did we miss the environmental trigger?" Leah answered honestly. "Because we were looking for something inside the dogs." The doctor nodded. "And you were looking outside?" "Yes. Why?" Leah looked at Rook. "Because 2 trained dogs don't suddenly behave the same way for no reason." One of the physicians nodded. "That's the lesson." Leah smiled. "That's the lesson." The story spread quickly through the Naval Medical Center. People who had never spoken to Leah suddenly knew her name. Nurses came by. Doctors asked questions. Technicians wanted to know about the K9 recovery method, but Leah kept redirecting the attention. "Ask the handlers. Ask the veterinarians. Watch the dogs." She didn't want praise. She wanted the lesson remembered. At 9:02 p.m., Commander Elias Grant, the senior SEAL officer responsible for the K9 program, entered the hospital. He had been briefed during the crisis. He walked toward the treatment room. "How are they?" Dr. Grant answered. "Stable." Elias exhaled. "Both?" "Both." He looked through the glass. Then he noticed Leah. "Who is she?" Marcus answered. "The nurse who figured it out." Elias looked at Leah. "Bring her over." Leah approached. Elias extended his hand. "Commander Elias Grant." "Leah Mercer, I know." She smiled. "You've been here for years." "Yes, and nobody knew about your K9 background?" Leah shrugged. "No. Why?" She gave the same answer. Nobody asked. Elias looked at Marcus, then back at Leah. "Well, I'm asking now." Leah smiled. "What would you like to know?" "Everything that could help us keep this from happening again." She nodded. "Then I'll help." Elias looked through the glass. "You saved 2 very rare dogs tonight." Leah shook her head. "The team saved them." He smiled. "That's what people say when they don't want credit." Leah laughed softly. "Maybe." Elias extended his hand again. This time, Leah shook it. "Thank you." At 9:18 p.m., the handlers were finally allowed to spend quiet time with their dogs. Marcus sat beside Rook. Jonah sat beside Lyra. Leah stood outside the room. Rook opened his eyes. He looked toward her. Marcus noticed. "He's looking for you." Leah smiled. "He knows the room is safe." Marcus shook his head. "No," he pointed. "He's looking for you." Leah stepped inside. Rook slowly lifted his head. She crouched beside him. She didn't touch him. Rook moved first. He rested his chin against her hand. Leah's eyes filled with tears. "Good boy." Marcus looked away. He didn't want anyone to see his face, but Leah saw him smiling. Then Lyra moved. She gently nudged Jonah's hand. Jonah laughed through tears. "You're okay." Her tail moved once, twice. Leah looked at both dogs, if Aled. Recovering the room that had been filled with fear only hours earlier was now peaceful. At 9:31 p.m., Commander Elias gathered the SEAL handlers outside. He looked at Leah, then at the dogs. "I want everyone who worked tonight to hear this." The handlers stood. Doctors remained nearby. Elias spoke quietly. "These 2 dogs are not replaceable." Nobody argued. "They have completed years of specialized training." He looked toward Leah. "And tonight, a nurse who most of us had never even spoken to recognized what was happening before we did." Leah lowered her eyes. Elias continued. "She didn't replace the doctors." He looked toward Dr. Grant. "She didn't replace the handlers." Then he looked back at Leah. She completed the picture. The room became silent. One by one, the SEALs nodded. Marcus stepped forward. "Ma'am." Leah looked up. "I've worked with Rook for almost 4 years." He paused. "I've never seen him trust someone that quickly." Leah smiled. "He trusted you first." Marcus shook his head. Maybe. He smiled. But tonight, he trusted you too. The next morning, Rook and Lyra were significantly improved. They were still under observation. They weren't ready to return to duty, but they were eating, drinking, standing, responding. The doctors expected a full recovery. And that was enough. Leah arrived for her next shift at 6:30 a.m. She expected the same hospital she had left the night before. Instead, she walked into a corridor where people were smiling at her. A technician waved, a nurse hugged her, Dr. Grant stopped her. "Good morning." Leah smiled. "Morning." Grant handed her a folder. "What's this?" "The new K9 emergency response protocol." Leah opened it. At the top was a note, developed with input from Leah Mercer. She looked at Grant. "You didn't have to put my name on it." "I did." "Why?" Grant smiled. "Because people should know who taught us." Leah looked at the folder. For years, she had believed leaving K9 work meant leaving that part of herself behind. She had been wrong. Mako had not been a failure. He had been a lesson. And now that lesson had helped save Rook and Lyra. She walked toward the veterinary wing. Through the glass, both dogs were standing. Rook saw her. His tail moved. Lyra saw her too. She tilted her head. Leah smiled. "Morning." Both dogs relaxed. And for the first time, Leah didn't feel like the person who had walked away from her past. She felt like someone who had finally made peace with it. At 10:15 a.m., the hospital held no ceremony. There were no cameras, no medals, no dramatic speeches, just the handlers, doctors, and a few SEAL officers standing near the K9 recovery area. Commander Elias approached Leah. "One more thing." She looked at him. "What?" "Our unit would like you to help train the medical staff." Leah smiled. "I'd be honored. And the handlers?" "Of course. And the dogs?" She laughed. "They're the real instructors." Elias smiled. "I think they already are. If you've stayed with this story until now, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more emotional military K9 stories about loyalty, courage, and the people who refuse to give up. And if you believe animals can sense when someone genuinely cares about them, tell us what your dog has taught you in the comments. That evening, Leah returned to the veterinary wing before going home. Rook was sleeping. Lyra was resting beside him. Their handler sat nearby. Everything was calm. Leah stood at the glass for a moment. She thought about Mako, about the young dog who had taught her that fear could hide beneath behavior, about Chief Maddox, about the lesson she had carried quietly for years. And finally, about the two dogs who had given her a chance to use it again. She smiled. Then Rook opened his eyes. He looked directly at her. Leah raised her hand. Rook slowly lowered his head. A tiny gesture, almost nothing. But Leah understood. He was telling her the same thing she had been trying to tell him all night. "I'm safe." She smiled and whispered through the glass. "Good." Neither of them needed anything else. At 6:30, the following morning, Cedar Point Naval Medical Center was quieter than it had been in nearly 12 hours. The emergency corridor had returned to its normal rhythm. Phones rang. Nurses moved between rooms. Doctors reviewed charts. The overnight crisis was beginning to feel like something that had already happened. But inside the veterinary wing, two military working dogs were still under observation. Rook was sitting upright. Lyra was standing beside her handler. Both were tired. Both were recovering. And both were alive. That was all Leah Mercer needed. She stood outside the treatment room with a paper cup of coffee in her hand. For several seconds, she simply watched them. Then Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hale walked over. "You've been here all night." Leah smiled. "So have you. He's my partner." She looked through the glass. "I know. Marcus leaned against the wall. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you tell anyone? Leah knew exactly what he meant. Her K9 background, the years before nursing, the technique, the mistakes, the experience. She looked down at her coffee. Because I thought that part of my life was over. Marcus frowned. Why? Leah was silent for a moment. Then she finally told him about Mako. Years earlier, before she had ever worn hospital scrubs, Leah had worked alongside military K9 teams. She wasn't a handler. She wasn't a veterinarian. Her specialty was behavioral recovery. She had learned how to help working dogs transition from intense operational environments back into controlled settings. Mako had been one of the dogs assigned to her. He was intelligent, fast, highly trained, and extremely sensitive. After one deployment, something changed. Certain sounds made him panic. He became restless. He stopped responding to familiar commands. Leah had assumed the solution was more structure, more commands, more repetition, more control. She had been wrong. The harder she pushed, the more frightened he became. Then one day, Chief Warren Maddox had stopped her. He had watched her for several minutes before saying something Leah never forgot. You're trying to make him obey because you're afraid of what happens if he doesn't. Leah remembered staring at him. Maddox had continued. Stop asking what he's doing wrong. Ask what he's afraid of. That changed everything. Leah stopped demanding. She started observing. She learned to lower stimulation, use predictable patterns. Let the dog choose when to approach. Lime the nervous system to settle before asking for obedience. Mako eventually recovered. But Leah never forgot how badly she had misunderstood him at first. She carried that lesson for years. And eventually, she left K9 work, not because she stopped caring. Because she thought someone else might be better suited to it. Then she became a nurse. Marcus listened quietly. So Mako taught you the technique? Leah nodded. He taught me the lesson, and last night, I remembered it. Marcus looked through the glass. Then maybe leaving wasn't a mistake. Leah smiled faintly. Maybe. At 7:15 a.m., Dr. Amelia Grant entered the room. She checked Rook's vitals, then Lyra's. She smiled. They're doing remarkably well. Marcus immediately asked, when can they go home? Grant laughed. Not today, Marcus sighed. I had to ask, they need observation. How long? At least another day or two. Marcus nodded. He understood. The dogs had survived the immediate crisis. Now they needed recovery. Dr. Grant walked toward Leah. I reviewed everything from last night. Leah nodded. What do you think? I think we made several mistakes. Leah looked surprised. Grant continued. Not medical mistakes. She pointed toward the treatment room. We focused on the dogs. We should have focused on the environment. Leah smiled. That's what I thought. Grant nodded. Your observation about the air unit changed everything. She paused. Your recovery protocol helped even more. Leah looked uncomfortable. It was a team effort. Grant smiled. I know you keep saying that. She handed Leah a folder. Still. Leah opened it. It was a draft of the hospital's new military K9 emergency response procedure. At the bottom was a section titled Behavioral Stress Recognition and Recovery. Leah looked at Grant. You want me to review this? I want you to help write it. Leah stared at her. Why me? Grant smiled. Because last night, 7 doctors had medical knowledge. She paused. And you had the missing piece. By 9:00 a.m., word had spread throughout the Naval Medical Center. The 2 K9s were improving. The environmental exposure had been identified. And the nurse who had helped stabilize them had a background nobody knew about. SEAL personnel began stopping by the veterinary wing. Not for attention, not for photographs, just to check on the dogs. And to thank Leah. One officer approached her. "Ma'am." Leah turned. "Yes, I'm Lieutenant Grant Holloway." She shook his hand. "I know." He smiled. "Marcus told me what happened. I'm glad they're improving." Holloway looked toward the dogs. "Those animals have protected people overseas." Leah nodded. "I know." He looked at her. "So on behalf of the unit," he paused, "thank you for protecting them." Leah smiled. "You don't have to thank me. I disagree." He stepped aside. Another SEAL approached, then another. One offered a handshake. Another simply nodded. A third quietly said, "Thank you." Leah began to realize something. They weren't praising her because she had performed some impossible trick. They were thanking her because she had taken the time to understand their partners. That meant more. At 10:40 a.m., Marcus took Rook outside for a short supervised walk. The dog moved slowly. His legs were still slightly weak, but he walked. Leah watched from the doorway. Rook stopped, looked back, then continued. Marcus smiled. "He keeps checking if we're following." Leah nodded. "That's normal." Marcus laughed. "He's always done that. Then he's himself." Marcus looked at her. "Yeah." He smiled. "He is." Lyra had a similar recovery. Jonah took her outside 20 minutes later. She walked farther than expected. When she returned, she immediately went toward Leah. Jonah loosened the lead. Lyra approached. Leah crouched. The dog gently pressed her nose against Leah's shoulder. Leah closed her eyes. "You're okay." Lyra's tail moved. Jonah smiled. "I've never seen her do that with someone she just met." Leah shook her head. "She doesn't think we just met." Jonah looked confused. "What do you mean?" "She remembers the room." He looked at Lyra. "The smell, the voice." Jonah smiled. "So she remembers you." Leah looked at Lyra. "Maybe." That afternoon, Commander Elias Grant returned. He had been briefed on the complete incident. He entered the veterinary wing, carrying 2 small folders. One was for Marcus. One was for Jonah. Inside were the preliminary recovery reports. He looked at both handlers. "Your dogs are going to recover." Marcus smiled. "Thank you, sir." Elias nodded. Then he turned toward Leah. "And you?" Leah looked up. "Sir, I owe you something." Leah frowned. "What?" "An apology." She looked surprised. "For what?" "Not knowing who you were." Leah smiled. "You didn't know me exactly." He paused. "And neither did most of us." He looked at the hospital corridor. "That shouldn't happen." Leah didn't know what to say. Elias continued. "You don't need a military title to have military experience." Leah nodded. "And you don't need to tell everyone your past to deserve respect." She smiled. "Thank you." A few hours later, Dr. Grant asked Leah to attend a meeting. 7 doctors were present. The same 7 who had worked through the night. Leah sat quietly at the end of the table. Dr. Grant placed the new protocol in front of everyone. "We're changing how we handle military working dogs during emergency treatment." One physician nodded. "Environmental assessment first." Another added, "Reduce unnecessary sensory stimulation." Another, "Handlers remain part of the recovery process." Dr. Grant looked toward Leah. "And behavioral stress recognition becomes part of the initial assessment." Everyone agreed. Leah looked around the room. These were the same doctors who had been desperately searching for an answer hours earlier. Now they were asking her questions, not because she outranked them, because they had learned something from her. And for Leah, that was enough. At 5:00 p.m., Marcus found her outside. "Rook wants to see you." Leah laughed. "Rook wants dinner, that too." She followed him. Rook was sitting calmly. When Leah entered, his ears lifted. His tail moved. She crouched. "Hey." Rook leaned forward. then gently placed his head against her shoulder. Leah smiled. Marcus watched quietly. You know, what? I thought I was going to lose him last night. Leah looked at him. So did I. Marcus's expression tightened. You did? Of course. But you didn't show it. Leah smiled. I was scared. Marcus looked surprised. You didn't seem scared. I was. Then how did you stay calm? Leah looked at Rook. Because he was already scared enough. Marcus nodded slowly. That answer stayed with him. Jonah entered with Lyra. She walked directly toward Leah. Now both dogs stood beside her, two rare military working dogs. Two handlers, one nurse. The room was quiet. Leah looked at them. You're both supposed to be resting. Marcus laughed. They don't listen. Leah smiled. Apparently not. Rook's tail moved. Lyra leaned against Jonah. For the first time since the emergency began, everyone laughed. It was small, but it felt important. 3 days later, both dogs were cleared to leave. The handlers arrived early. The dogs were fitted with their military harnesses. Marcus knelt beside Rook. You ready? Rook looked at Leah. Marcus laughed. Apparently he's waiting for her. Leah walked over. She crouched. Rook gently touched his nose to her hand. Go home. Rook stayed. Leah smiled. Your handler is waiting. Rook finally turned toward Marcus. Marcus shook his head. I can't believe I'm jealous of a nurse. Everyone laughed. Before leaving, Commander Elias gathered the handlers and several hospital staff near the entrance. He didn't make a formal speech. He simply looked at Leah. Our K9 unit doesn't forget people who protect our dogs. He extended his hand. Leah shook it. Thank you. Then Marcus stepped forward. Ma'am. Leah looked at him. He held out a small challenge coin. She stared at it. I can't accept this. You can. It's too much. No. Marcus smiled. It's not enough. Leah finally accepted it. She looked at the coin, then at Rook. Rook was sitting beside Marcus. Lyra sat beside Jonah. Both dogs looked healthy. Both looked alert. Both were going home. Leah closed her hand around the coin. Thank you. As the handlers prepared to leave, Marcus stopped. One more thing. Leah looked up. What? If we ever have another K9 emergency, he smiled. Can we call you? Leah laughed. Only if you call the veterinarian too. Marcus laughed. Deal. The doors closed behind them. Leah stood watching as the two handlers walked away with their dogs. She felt something unexpected. Not pride, not relief. Pieced for years, she had believed leaving K9 work meant she had failed. But now she understood something. Maybe she hadn't abandoned that part of her life. Maybe she had carried it somewhere it was needed. She had learned how to recognize fear. Then she had learned how to care for people. And eventually, those two worlds had met again. A week later, Leah returned to the veterinary wing. On the wall was a new laminated document. Military K9 Emergency Response. Cedar Point Naval Medical Center. Below the title were several names, doctors, veterinary technicians, handlers. And hers, Leah Mercer, behavioral recovery consultant. She stared at it for several seconds. Dr. Grant walked up beside her. Looks strange? Leah smiled. A little. You earned it. Leah nodded. Thank you. Grant looked at her. Do you miss it? Miss what? K9 work, Leah thought. Sometimes. Would you go back? Leah smiled. No. Grant looked surprised. Why? Leah looked through the glass. Because on the other side, a hospital patient was being cared for. A nurse was checking a monitor. Another was speaking softly to an elderly patient. And somewhere else in the building, two military working dogs were back with the people they trusted. Leah smiled. I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That evening, Marcus sent her a message. It contained one photograph. Rook and Lyra were back at the training facility. Both were standing beside their handlers, healthy AALT, ready to return to gradual conditioning. Underneath the photograph, Marcus had written, "They remember you." Leah stared at the picture, then smiled. She typed back, "Tell them I remember them too. If this story meant something to you, subscribe and stay with us for more stories about military K9s, the people who protect them, and the quiet heroes who show up when everyone else has run out of answers. And remember this: sometimes the person who saves the day isn't the person everyone was watching. Sometimes it's the person standing quietly in the corner, paying attention." Months later, Rook and Lyra returned to Cedar Point for a routine evaluation. This time, there was no emergency. No panic, no frightened handlers. No 7 doctors searching desperately for an explanation. Just 2 healthy military working dogs walking through the veterinary corridor. Rook saw Leah first. He stopped. His handler smiled. "Go ahead." Rook walked toward her. Leah crouched. He placed his head against her shoulder. Lyra followed. She rested her nose against Leah's hand. Leah laughed softly. "Look at you two." Marcus stood behind them. "They're different now." Leah looked up. "How?" "They don't panic in unfamiliar places anymore." Leah smiled. "That's good." Marcus shook his head. "No." He looked at Rook. "That's because they learned something." "What?" "They learned that unfamiliar doesn't always mean unsafe." Leah looked at the dog, then she smiled. "That's a lesson worth learning." The 4 of them stood there for a moment. 2 handlers, 2 K9s, 1 nurse. And a story that had begun with 7 doctors believing they were running out of options. Nobody called Leah a miracle worker. No pretended she had done something impossible. The doctors had done their job. The handlers had done theirs. The equipment had done its job. And Leah had contributed one thing that had almost been overlooked: experience. She had recognized the environment. She had recognized the fear. She had recognized the behavior. And most importantly, she had remembered what one frightened dog had taught her years before. Don't ask what the dog is doing wrong. Ask what the dog is afraid of. That lesson had once broken Leah's confidence. Years later, it had helped save 2 rare military working dogs. And perhaps that was the most meaningful part of the entire story. Leah hadn't become a hero because everyone finally noticed her. She became a hero because when the moment came, she was ready. The hospital had once known her as the quiet nurse. Now they knew her as something else. The nurse who listened. The nurse who remembered. The nurse who didn't give up. And whenever Rook and Lyra returned to Cedar Point, their handlers always made one stop before leaving: Leah's station. Because the 2 dogs remembered the woman who had stayed calm when everyone else was afraid. And Leah remembered the lesson they had given her in return. Sometimes saving a life begins with simply paying attention.